So the way that I see jobs to be done is as a complementary technique that for me actually gives a lot more power and a lot more precision at what you might call upfront investigation and upfront research. Jobs to be done excels at understanding the problem space in a way that I think a lot of those other methods don't do, with rigor, precision, and granularity. If you're doing design thinking or lean or agile, jobs to be done doesn't replace those. You don't have to get rid of those. I think what it does is it actually interlocks with those things and provides a lot more power to all of those techniques. And here's how it works.
Welcome to the Experience Edge, the podcast where we dive deep with industry leaders, pioneers, and CX experts to explore what it really takes to create meaningful customer-centric business impact. So my guest today is Jim Kalbach. He is an expert at the intersection of experience design, innovation, new ways of working, with a deep passion for creating meaningful user experience and driving organizational change. He has authored 5 influential books, of which my favorite, and I'm sure many of you listening is a familiar one, is the Jobs to be Done playbook, which came out in 2020. He co-founded the JTBD toolkit, a comprehensive online resource dedicated to the Jobs to be Done framework. We'll put links in the show note. You can find everything of his work on jtbdtoolkit.com. And with years of exciting work in experience design, design thinking, he's the chief evangelist of Mural, one of the leading digital whiteboard tools in our space. So there is so much to cover, but let's get into it. Jim, welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I want to start not with, again, rehashing the definition of what is a jobs to be done framework or how should we think about it, but I do think it's important because you have a unique perspective on it, and I want to put it in context of what most of the people listening to this show in experience design, in customer experience are familiar with, which is the experience map, the journey map, journey management. And then we have the jobs to be done. Where do they fit and how would you stack rank them? What are differences? Can we frame it in that way a little bit to kick us off today?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, and it does reflect a little bit of my background because I did grow up, so to speak, in UX teams. I had all the design challenges of sprints and wireframes and convincing stakeholders, and I've worked on innovation projects, both as an external consultant, but internally as well too. And I came across jobs to be done. So, which is to say, I'm familiar with personas and journey maps and ethnography and contextual inquiry, and those things don't go away, in my opinion, right? But I came across jobs to be done about 20 years ago, and I thought, wow, this really enhances and complements a lot of the things that I was doing in UX design and innovation, all right? And the things that really drew me to jobs to be done are a very careful language that's used that doesn't refer to technology or solutions, right? And that's important because what it allows you to do is have a mindset shift, right? You're not doing a journey map of your product. You're looking at what the heck the person's trying to get done independent of that. And I think that's an important principle that I carried with me. But also the structured language, how you formulate things, right, is very precise in jobs to be done. And I loved the rigor of jobs to be done. So the way that I see jobs to be done, and I hope I positioned it this way in my book as well too, is as a complementary technique that for me actually gives a lot more power and a lot more precision at what you might call upfront investigation and upfront research, right? So if we think about the problem space and the solution space, right? Jobs to be done excels at understanding the problem space in a way that I think a lot of those other methods don't do, with rigor, precision, and granularity, right? So for me, again, I think the big word is complementary, right? I don't see, if you're doing design thinking or lean or agile, jobs to be done doesn't replace those. You don't have to get rid of those. I think what it does is it actually interlocks with those things and provides a lot more power to all of those techniques. And here's how it works. All of those methods that I just named, design thinking, you can even say design sprints, journey mapping workshops, lean testing, agile, they all have a place at the top for what problem are we trying to solve, right? Think about a design sprint. You go in, you say, here's a challenge, right? Where does that actually come from, right? What Jobs to be Done does is gives you a very, very specific way to come up with a challenge that you have a lot of confidence is the right challenge to solve. So it gives you the problem that fits into those other existing techniques.
I love that. And personally, I've never been a big fan of the design sprint philosophy and the approach. I think it's too shallow, too narrow, too confined into a certain space. It's great for innovation theater. But what I love about Jobs to be Done is the precision that you're saying. And I see the same in the customer journey when used correctly. But I'm curious, like, what do you mean with precision? Because we have the steps in the customer journey. We have the steps in the Jobs to be Done. But give me some examples of when you talk about precision. What do you mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the Jobs to be Done framework, I look at 4 different buckets of information, right? So we're basically listening to our market, I would argue, in a unique way, not through the lens of our brand or our product, but we're listening for what they're trying to do independent of us. So you're taking your ego and you're taking yourself out of the equation and you're listening. And what Jobs to be Done does is it gives us a language to listen to 4 specific categories of information. One are the steps in getting the job done. So you frame a focus job, and that becomes your unit of analysis, and you want to know what is the sequence of steps to get that done. The other thing that you're looking for are what we call job metrics. And these are the measures of success that you can, it's separate than the job steps. These are separate metrics and statements that we collect that you can then prioritize. You can even quantify those, right? For any focus job, you might have 50 or more success metrics, or what I call job metrics, right? You also collect the emotions. One misconception, by the way, is that Jobs to be Done doesn't include emotion. It does. It's a separate bucket of information. We just separate those things into discrete buckets. And then the last bucket is what we call contexts, right? So if I have a focus job, I'm going to have 12 to 24 steps in how that job gets done. But I might have 50 to 100 outcome statements. I might have 24 emotions. I'm going to have a whole pile of context. So what Jobs to be Done does first is says, let's get a comprehensive list of all of those things and then prioritize them. Don't assume you know which context is most important. Don't assume you know which emotion is important. And with the job metrics, don't assume you know which ones of those are most important. But then you can get very, very precise and pinpoint and say, at this step, they want to reach this outcome and have these emotions. And you can even quantify that as well, too. So there's a lot of rigor and a lot of, when I say precision, I'm also talking about granularity, too. Sometimes people are surprised, because like you said, the innovation theater, they just say, we want to make it easy. And well, that's not a goal. I can't brainstorm around easy. Give me something very specific, like reduce the time it takes for me to, fill something out or understand something. Like Jobs to be Done can get that specific.
Tell me about the target jobs. This is a famous concept that you talk about a lot, you write about a lot. And when you explain the 4 buckets, so let me repeat them, like the steps to get it done, the job metrics, the emotions, and the context. We're talking about one job, but the level of granularity, I think that's the key here. So how do you know what job you target? And this sounds a lot like what we see in journey management as well. Like, what is the level of the journey, the level of abstraction that we're looking at? Are we talking life cycle? Are we talking micro journey? I'm buying a specific thing right now in an online store. Like, how do we think about the target job?
Yeah. The answer is there's a hierarchy there, just like in journey management, right? And it's up to you and your team to agree on and decide what level of abstraction you want to work on. Those 4 buckets of information are all in relation to your target job. So the target job really frames your research effort. And anytime we do a research effort, we have to scope what we're talking, who we're talking to, and what we're talking to them about, whether it's ethnography or a usability test or a journey map or Jobs to be Done. So that framing exercise comes with any research that we do. In Jobs to be Done, we just place our bet on that target job. That's why we call it Jobs to be Done, is because the unit of analysis is that job to be done. Now, you need to also... So the job to be done should be something that is meaningful to the people that you want to serve, right? But it should also be relevant to you as an organization. So to answer your question, you have to look at things like, what are we about? What's our mission? What is strategically relevant to us right now, right? And just like in Journey Map, you don't just map everything. Let's map the world. It's like, no. We have a business gap that we need to fill. We need some information that fills a business gap. We're trying to grow and there's a gap in information. Let's map that thing. Same thing with jobs to be done. It needs to be strategically relevant to the team. Now that can happen at different levels of granularity, right? If you want to look at drilling a hole in the wall, and I use that example because that's kind of the classic example, it's like I could study drilling a hole in the wall through the lens of jobs to be done. Why not? Right? But you'd probably want to go up a little bit higher in granularity. And I have a couple of techniques that help you level set that to get at the kind of the right level. It's kind of like Goldilocks, this one's too hard, that one's too soft. So, which is all to say, there's no right or wrong answer. You can innovate or find differentiated value at any level. It's really what's most appropriate and relevant, and that takes some introspection as well too. The courses that I teach, we go through that, and I teach how to think about that hierarchy. But as you pointed out, yeah, absolutely, same thing with journey maps. At what level? And you might end up with here's the bottom line. You'll probably end up with what I call an ecosystem of jobs. That your organization cares about bigger jobs, and then you can kind of break them down and do the analysis at a lower level.
How do you get to the right level? Can you give an example of what you do in your workshop specifically to help people understand, like, hey, I'm drilling a hole in the wall because I want to put a picture on the wall, because I want to have a nice surrounding, because I want to have family memories, because like bigger. But like, what is the right level? Because you don't want to get into the emotional territory of like belonging, because you can't market that, you can't sell that. Maybe like that's the wrong way. Like, what is an example of how you help people to level set?
Yeah, we can stick with that example, right? Which is a good one, right? You want to drill a hole in the wall, and you can always ask why, right? If you ask why, you go up in the hierarchy of abstraction, right? Oh, I want to hang a picture on the wall. Why do you want to hang a picture on the wall? Because you want to preserve family memories. All right. Why do you want to preserve family memories? So that you're happy and content with your home life, right? And then, eventually, if you ask those questions, you eventually end up with like love, self-actualization, and happiness, right? So, right now, I mentioned being strategically relevant to your organization. Now, you have to look at yourself, right? If you're a drill bit manufacturer, right, and you want to innovate, starting with having a better home life is probably out of your, you manufacture drills, or drill bits, not even drills, just the thing that makes the hole, right? If that's what business you're in, you probably don't want to start innovation with, we're going to help people have a better home life. It's too far away from what you can affect. So one of the questions that you need to ask is not only what's important to us and what's important to the people that we serve, but what can you actually affect, right? Because you're talking about, eventually we want to create differentiated value, right? And if you're manufacturing drill bits, you're not going to help people have a happy home life, right? It's too far away, right? And I've been guilty of this in my design thinking career as well, too. I've walked into design sprints and said, we want to solve world peace, right? And he's like, we're a team of designers, Jim. We can't do any of this stuff, right? So you end up with all these great ideas that you actually can't act on. So you have to also think about what's in your control. But again, there's a series of questions and exercises that we do to kind of level set, like, you put a target out and then you say what's above it, what's below it, right? So you do some exploration first, but then you also need to do some introspection of your organization or your team as well.
Can we talk about the job metrics specifically? Yeah. Like, let's say we settled on a level, and maybe we should give more like a B2B example here, a little bit more like rusty example of, okay, I'm having an insurance, like I'm part of like this behemoth company as a customer, but I'm now looking from the insurance company's lens. Let's play with an example. I don't know if that's the right way, but let's see where it takes us. So one of the jobs to be done is I'm gonna insure my child. Okay. Is that a good starting point for us to talk about job metrics?
You mean like with healthcare? Like
yes,
healthcare
why not? Let's do it.
Okay, yeah. So I want to, obtain health insurance for my family, something like that, right? Is that good?
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I want to obtain healthcare for my family.
Yeah.
Is that the right level to start at a job, or would you go like ask why and go up the ladder? Like, are we at the right level? Like,
I think within the field of healthcare broadly, or insuring healthcare, and by the way, that's actually where I start. Is I say, what field are you in? What domain? What's your business? What do you do? Right?
Right.
He's like, we're in the business of insuring people's health care, right? So I put that at the top, and what that helps do is kind of frame things and put a ceiling on it. So then if the first thing you put out, let's say, obtaining health insurance for my family. Oh, well, let me back up for a second, because the next thing you have to do, the first thing that you should actually do is determine the who. Who's the job performer here, right? Because within a B2B context, there's lots of people that you might serve, right? Dual-sided business model, multiplayer situations, right? And in health insurance, there are underwriters, claims agents, salespeople. There's obviously the insured people. There's doctors and nurses. There's hospitals. There's all kinds of stakeholders in that field, right? And what we kind of skipped over that step, which is fine. And we said, oh no, it's an insured person, right? A patient, right? That's who our job performers. So you got to look at it through their lens. Okay, health insurance through the lens of the patient or the individual, right? And then we figure out what our focus job is, or our target job, which would be obtain health insurance for my family, right? So what I would do is put that out and then ask why. Can you go up from there? And he's like, yeah, because I want to lead a healthy life, or I want to feel secure, that my family is secure. Okay, let's ask how. If you ask how, by the way, you go down, right? And then you say, okay,
yeah,
how
so
do
why
I do
is up and how is down?
Correct. Why is up and
Right.
how is down. And then you say, okay, how do I do that? Well, first I have to know what are my options, right? And what is it going to cost? And what's the coverage of it, right? Those actually then later on become job steps. But in this framing activity, what you want to do is put something out, ask why, and then and ask how. And then once you do that, you can say, well, should I actually start at the higher level, or should we start at maybe we need to start at that lower level, right? But once you get that map, things start to crystallize, right? And that's where you can have a team conversation and say, do we just want to help people understand their options? Maybe we want to start at a lower level, right? Because that's the team, that's what we can affect, right? So it's a conversation, first of all. And by the way, I'll probably make this point another time in the episode here, is I see jobs to be done as a collaborative tool, right? It's not science where you just emerge with the answer and then everybody follows you, because we know that doesn't happen in reality anyway. So the scoping exercise, or the framing context, as I call it, that should be a team activity, right? So once you start going up and down the hierarchy, it's really about understanding from the team's perspective where you want to focus your attention.
So we got that now, and I made a note of it. We're going to come back to the collaborative versus like the research piece, but let's talk about the metrics now. So we want to make sure our family is safe.
Yeah.
We're going to find insurance for them.
Right.
That's the level we are at. So, and then we go about the job metrics. So how do we get them?
Yeah, so jobs to be done begins with qualitative research. So what I would do is go out and talk to individuals looking to obtain health insurance, or you could even have people who have obtained it. But what you want to talk to them about, this qualitative research, mostly interviewing, right, is you want to talk to them about that target job. Tell me about how you got health insurance for your family. Where did you start, right? What did you do after that? What did you do before that? What was difficult along the way? How did you feel along the way? These are the open interviewing formats, questions that you do. But you could imagine if you talk to 10 people for an hour each, you'd have a lot of different data about the steps, the emotions, the job metrics, and the context, right? So the first part of the research is qualitative, and it's interviewing, and you extract all of these elements. Don't place any bets. Don't take any and start solutioning. Just collect them all first. And that's, again, I mentioned that at the beginning. That's one thing I like about jobs to be done, is before you move forward, you try to be as comprehensive as possible. Did I get all of the job steps? Did I get all of the emotions? And you can determine that, by the way, is if you go into an interview and you're not hearing anything new anymore, right? You're like, oh, okay, I know what this guy's going to say because I've talked to a dozen other people already. And we have a pretty good set, right? Before you then start modeling them. So the job metrics in particular are what I also call success metrics, right? What the job steps show is how do I get from point A to point B, and those are what we call functional jobs, right? And if you look at them written, if you see some examples, at least from my approach, they'd be things like determine healthcare options, determine what I can afford, determine what coverage I need, right? Contact companies. They'd be very functional, right? You're like, okay, yeah, but that doesn't tell me if it's good or bad, right? Or if I'm successful or not. Those all come out in what we call job metrics, right? And that would be things like reduce the amount of options I have to consider, or things like make it easy to contact the company. It would be hard for me to think of them, but there's actually going to be about 50 of these things that you'll find from your qualitative research. So the job metrics are really the measures of success, right? The job steps, bare bones, functional. The job metrics, that's where all the color comes from.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit, if you allow me. So I'm leading the business unit here. I only care about the underwriting risk, like all these nice jobs to be done. Fantastic. Like you're going to talk about these job metrics. Why should I care? Like, what is in it for me? Like, I care about like not putting the insurance company at risk, sending out insurance to people that can actually afford it. Like, all these job metrics and all the steps that you're uncovering. Like, that's fine. What's in it for me, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's almost, I hate to say it, but that's almost like an old-fashioned perspective of we're the we're the company, and we interface with other companies, and that's what we do. I think what you have to look at is your value chain, all the way down to the end consumer, even if you're many steps away from that end consumer, right? Ram Charan wrote a book called What the CEO Wants You to Know, and in it he has this value chain that normally big B2B business companies kind of look down the value chain, and the end consumer is like the underwriter says, I don't care about that, right? What he says is you got to look at it the other way around. That's where you find the innovation opportunities, even for the underwriter. It's like, who are you underwriting for? What is the benefit that they get ultimately from, and work backwards? And Jobs to be Done loves that type of thinking, because you can start downstream and then work back up, right? And Steve Jobs even said himself, right? You got to start with the experience and work back towards the technology, not the other way around. And insurance, the technology is underwriting and policy making and things like that, right? So that's the one thing, is that I do believe that even in B2B context, looking at the ultimate value and starting there, working backwards, benefits everybody along the way, and it also shows opportunities for innovation, right? I think the other thing is, when we did that job performer exercise that you and I just did in like 3 seconds, but we would list all of the stakeholders in this industry that we're in. We could take underwriters as the job performer and look at their job, right? So you're assuming that we looked at somebody else's job, but we could help underwriters by saying, let's look at your job to be done. What are your success criteria as represented by the job metrics? And we're going to come up with a solution that makes your job easier. So you could put underwriters as your job performer and one of their jobs as the target job.
Many people are using the frameworks around this and are applying it, but they have a hard time scaling this. And typically that is because there is no ROI proven, right? We in business talk about it all day long and want to hear about it, right? I 100% agree with you. It's the old-fashioned way of thinking. You should start with the experience and then design your business around it. But unfortunately, we're not there, right? We have this massive legacy system, processes, team structure, silos, and we cannot just like change that overnight. So we got to have the ROI case. We got to have the proof points. Like, what is the ROI of Jobs to be Done? Like, how would you frame it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's an absolute there, and by that I mean when we look at the field as such, right? There are tons of examples, right, from different industries of ROI, right? They're published, they're out there. We have one coming that's out now with a company called Stepstone, where we helped Stepstone scale their Jobs to be Done practices internally, and that translated to product features and value that they actually delivered to the market. So you can read about that in our Stepstone case study. And Stepstone in the UK and Germany is like the largest employment career platform. Basically, people looking for jobs and people looking to hire. And we help their product organization scale out jobs to be done to 400 people, right, across the organization. But so what is the ROI of that? I think to some degree it has to come from your industry and even from your company. So one of the things that I recommend when teams are getting started is learn some of the basics of jobs to be done and not only the theory but how to practice it, and come up with a success story of your own. It doesn't have to be in the critical path of your business, right? It could be something small and on the side, but you need to have something to demonstrate to other business stakeholders in your company that there is success here, right? And I think that's the best thing to do. Rather than looking at gigantic numbers, I don't know, IBM saved $1 gazillion with jobs to be done. It's like, yeah, but we're just this small company. Come up with the story that's going to be relevant to your company by trying jobs to be done on a project.
What does scaling to 400 people look like in practice? Does it mean like training all of them individually? Is it training the trainer? Is it a lot of the toolkit?
Yeah, it's a train the trainer kind of thing, right? And that wasn't necessarily to train everybody to be able to do jobs to be done research, because the interviewing and the analysis and all of the modeling and things you have to do, you're not going to have engineers and developers necessarily doing it. So there was kind of a pyramid of people. The people who are actually going to do the research and continue to grow that practice, but also grow the insights that jobs to be done can bring with it, and then layers of people that need different types of understanding, right? But at a minimum, what we wanted was that everybody had some understanding of what we meant when we said an unmet need. Or a job story, or some of the other artifacts that we were pointing at, and what ended up happening are some rituals, habits, and behaviors, and I think that's really important when you talk about scaling, right? Because it's not about the training, as we know, like only 10% of training sticks, right? That's not it. I think training's important, right, to get a baseline and to get the ball moving and some momentum going. But it's really going to be the rituals and the practices and the habits that you form. And in this case, just as an example, project briefs or product documents at the top. What's the unmet need that we're going for, right? Those types of motions that bring jobs to be done into roadmaps, into sprint planning, into design sprints. I know you don't like them, but design sprints or whatever you're doing, like the way that you do that, those have to be kind of ritualized. I think that's the key to scaling. Is not the initial training. It's we can train 400 people through train to train. That's not the problem. The problem is how do you do it 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, and that's where your habits, behaviors, and rituals are going to come in.
Right. I think that's such an important and undervalued piece of like in the decision-making process that exists or is already present, like these product requirement documents, PRDs. I don't know how they call them at the company, but ingesting this there is a huge time saver, but it also is helpful. Like I know one of the biggest energy companies in Germany, they have a simple rule and they say like there can't be an epic on a roadmap that doesn't link to a customer journey. So they're always thinking about where in the customer experience are we making an impact, where are we changing it, and obviously how does that link to the business. But let's talk about decision making, because ultimately it's a framework, and most frameworks, especially in business, are designed for decisions. So let's unpack that a bit. You mentioned rituals, habits, practices to actually like consistently make decisions in the right way, I believe is what we're trying to achieve here. So how does, in a skilled organization with jobs, how do we think about decision making? Like what are the rituals that we're impacting and where do they happen and where in the organization are we impacting that?
Well, first of all, I've never worked for an organization or with an organization that didn't have a backlog of ideas or things that they could be doing, right? I ask this everything, when I teach and give talks and things, I ask that question. Does anybody not have any ideas? Like, you're just I'm out of ideas, Jim. I don't have ideas what my company should be doing. It's usually the opposite, right? You go to a product manager, they got a ton of backlog issues. You go to the design team, they're like, oh yeah, we saved the company at lunchtime with our idea. There's just ideas all over the place, right? That's usually not the problem. The problem is, how do we prioritize those? And so that's my first question I ask people is, by what logic are you prioritizing the current set of opportunities and options that you have? And very often it's arbitrary and random, unfortunately, or it's based on things like technology, budgets, resources.
But it's very solution oriented, right?
It's very solution oriented, or it's stakeholder oriented, right? Because the CEO wanted that, right?
But not problem oriented.
Not problem oriented, exactly. And I think you're on board with this. What Jobs to be Done does, I think, better than other human-centered frameworks and market listening frameworks, what it does really well is it gives focus, and it gives a human-centered rationale for what you should focus on and why, by way of this unmet need identification, right? And we're able to say, out of all the things that you could possibly do, solve that unmet need, and because it's unmet, you'll get the differentiated value. Now what I can do is I can map my ideas back to that, to the unmet need, right? So what Jobs to be Done does is it first asks you to be very focused. That scoping exercise that we did to get to that target job, that's going to help you shed a lot of the variables and the considerations that don't matter. So your research is already focused. Then the outcome of the Jobs to be Done analysis, as we said, is very precise, very granular. And it says, get this unmet need done and you'll be ahead of the competition. Or get this unmet need done and you'll provide differentiated value for customers, right? It doesn't tell you how to do it. But you got a backlog of hows right over here, right? But it tells you what problem you should be solving, and that brings focus. So for me, the biggest benefit, you can talk about ROI and bottom line and dollars, and a lot of that is hocus pocus anyway. For me, one of the biggest benefits of Jobs to be Done is it brings focus to your decision making.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. If you want more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access, check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Are you seeing companies being able to have a Jobs to be Done framework that they can actually tie their data against? So they understand those target jobs, they've structured them, and they actually have a data model to understand like where customers are. Like, have you seen such companies?
I haven't seen that yet, and I know a lot of the journey mapping and customer management tools and things like that. That's where they're going. I don't think Jobs to be Done is there yet. I've not seen it marrying that back to data. There are things that I've seen people do that are kind of like a point in time data, right? Like at this point in time, our survey says the market needs these things, but it's not like where journey management is going, where you can have like ongoing data with touch points and things like that. The field isn't there yet, and I don't know if it needs to be honest with you, because I think Jobs to be Done is really about where should we find differentiated value and where should we innovate, right? So it's really about the things that your business doesn't know about the market, right? And I don't know if that needs to be a management thing that's ongoing.
Yeah, and is there also, because it sounds sometimes like these jobs are so timeless. I mean, if you're in the shoe business, if you're in the insurance business, like the jobs people need to do, like having insurance for their family because their family is growing, that will never change.
That's
the way we get products or get service might change, but that job doesn't change. So I'm fascinated, like, why aren't there companies organizing their data around these? Because they're so timeless and they're so solution agnostic and not like bound by technology. So that always fascinates me.
Yeah, and that longevity of information, I think, is underestimated. I've done some Jobs to be Done modeling and investigations in my career, and then I'll look back on the job map, for instance, and I'm like, It's the same thing.
Still
5
the
years
same.
later, it's still the same, right? In fact, one of the test questions that I use as a kind of mnemonic device when you're creating a job map or even writing job steps is, what would they have done decades ago, or what would they have done 50 years ago, right? So obtain health insurance. One thing that we wouldn't say in jobs to be done is consult a website, right? Because they didn't do that 50 years ago. But what they did was gather potential healthcare insurance providers, right? How did they do it 50 years ago? I actually don't know. Did they have I don't know how you found health insurance back then. But you want to write those statements in a way that are timeless, right? And the way to do that is say, what did they do 50 years ago? In fact, I was working with a company that was in agriculture, and they were looking at helping farmers plant crops. And they asked themselves, what did they do 2,000 years ago? And guess what? Planting a crop, there are fundamental aspects of that haven't changed in 2,000 years. Determine what to plant, determine when to plant it, get the soil ready for planting, plant it, take care of weeds, harvest the thing, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's what they did 2,000 years ago. The upshot of a lot of this, by the way, is it also helps future-proof your thinking, right? Because in the future, we might have AI and, I don't know, VR farming. I don't know what that means, but let's say we have VR farming, right, in the future. It's like, well, I got to determine what to plant, when to plant it. I got to get the soil ready. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. So the longevity of jobs to be done research, for me, makes it foundational. It's foundational research. A lot of people are just getting into it and like, oh, this is so much work. And I'm like, yeah, but in a year from now or 2 years from now, you're not going to have to go back and redo it. It's not as volatile as like NPS data. NPS data changes in a minute, right? This is stuff that's going to be around for years that you can, as you pointed out, I can then model and map things back to it. It becomes a very durable and stable structure that you can rely on for years to come.
I love this framework. I never thought of this, like making the 50-year leap back in time to really understand it. And I think it's the same for journey management, right? Defining those journey steps, gathering them from your data. And we're so engrossed in our own solutions that we're like, oh, the journey is about clicking in the app and then getting this. And then in between, there's some experience that we notice. And like, no.
That's right.
We want to get that insurance and we want to do something else. So maybe like 100 years ago, there wasn't even insurance, but like, let's leave it at that. But I think you're right. Like making it like time agnostic is a fantastic way to think about, did I get the right framing? Or am I still thinking in my own garden and thinking about my own product, right?
And making it solution agnostic makes it time agnostic. I think that's the important point.
Yes, I love that. So let's talk about collaboration versus research and your approach versus like the... so just to level set, like we have Bob Musta and we have Clayton Christensen, like they are the originators of the Jobs to be Done framework. You popularized it with your book, I think is the simplest way to explain it. But you're also different in a way that you are promoting collaboration. You're working on like how to bring people into this methodology where they might be way more in the scientific method, going deep. So maybe I'm already revealing too much, but like, what is the difference between how you are thinking about this and why does it matter so much? Because you said, let's put a pin in it. So here we are, but like, why does it matter so much?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Clayton Christensen, and there's been a lot of other consultants out there that have taken, Bob Mesta is one of them, and other people that have taken the Jobs to be Done framework and operationalized it. If you don't know Clayton Christensen, he's one of the most important business authors with disruptive innovation. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But he used to consult in the stratosphere. Like the CEOs of the biggest companies in the world would call him up, and they were like, "Oh my, we got Clayton Christensen, right?" So he was operating way up here, and he never really operationalized the field of jobs to be done. Consultants did, but guess what? They were also consulting at that level, like, what company strategies should you be in, right? And it needed to be very rigorous, and it needed to be durable at the strategic level, right? Which is great, and Jobs to be Done can do that, right? That's great. I was an individual contributor when I came across Jobs to be Done, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm not steering my company strategy. I'm in the middle of a design sprint or whatever, and I believed that this, what I call jobs thinking, and by the way, I'm not just putting another X thinking in the world, because there's design thinking and all that. I'm not saying that, but the job's way of thinking, that's what the job's mindset, right? The jobs to be done mindset. I was like, no, I think it can actually help me on the ground get through my project work, or communicate to my stakeholders, or make a decision, or provide focus to my work. That's what I believed when I first came across jobs to be done. That it doesn't have to be the strategic thing that you pay high, expensive consultants to do. And I think that's kind of the flavor that you recognized in my book. Is I was speaking about jobs to be done is something everybody can do, right? Or think about, right? It's something that can touch everything in the organization as well too, like marketing teams, right? Support teams can be, sales teams. I'm talking to somebody right now about jobs to be done for sales, right? And things like that. And really just trying to, not make it this special, expensive, exclusive science only for decision makers that then say to the rest of the organization, I've made a decision, go execute it, right? I thought it was something that could also help execution while you're doing it as well too. And that's what I was trying to do in the book, and that's what I teach too to this day, 4 years later.
So it's still rooted in research, but it's about bringing different people, different perspectives into the work, doing it, working together, rather than, okay, we're going to have the experts do it and then bring us back like the insights so that we can actually make a change in the business and we're happy.
That's right, yeah. That's right. And I've never, like I said, contextual inquiry, ethnography, personas, journeyman, I've done all the designerly things, all the innovation techniques as well too. I have never found a framework that was so solid and so sound that you could come to your team with a PowerPoint deck or an answer and say, we're going to do this, and they all go immediately, we're going to do that thing Jim brought to me. No, you have to tell the story. You have to win the hearts and minds. There has to be inclusion, discussion. The team has to feel it in their bones. They have to internalize it, right? So the other thing that I try to do is think about the collaboration life of jobs to be done as well, and the function that it plays in terms of collaboration. So, for instance, if you create a job map, which is chronological sequence of the steps, and you look at it and you go, yeah, no duh, that doesn't tell me anything. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't, but let's have a conversation on top of that. And let's start to evaluate it through different lenses, like where are we good and where are we bad in this job map? Where do our competitors outperform us? What's the hardest step to get done? And when you give people those tasks and they start to put dots on there or discuss it, right? Suddenly you're like, oh, we've together as a team, we've come to a conclusion we wouldn't have if we were looking at our NPS data or product performance metrics.
So going back to like why is up and how is down analogy that you gave, isn't it then the other way around? Because we typically see like the NPS survey or the NPS data is telling us what is happening. And then we ask the question, like, why? So then we go down, and we start to dig, and then we might use jobs to be done as a framework to really uncover that. So we go down, we go deeper until we like can't ask why more, and we truly believe we found the solution. Isn't that typically how it goes? Like, it is most beautiful when we start with understanding people, their needs, their experiences first, but typically it's like, no. NPS is down. We got to pay attention to something. Let's figure it out.
Yeah, I think so. And NPS doesn't go away either. All of these things that you're doing don't necessarily go away. But NPS is kind of like what I call the check engine light in your car. You have this, it says check engine. It's like, what's wrong? It could be any part of my engine. It's just a check engine, right? So it's basically just a flag. It just goes up and it says, check your engine, right? But that's where the rigor and the precision of jobs to be done can look at the motivations and the whys and all the pain points and unmet needs around that in a lot of detail and with a lot of rigor as well too. So it is the type of thing that tends to be a lot more analytical and give you far more color and texture than a lot of just numbers and metrics and things like that.
What are some of the mistakes you've seen over the years? I mean, you've seen so many organizations work with so many teams to do this, but I'm sure there are some patterns and some things that typically can go wrong and will go wrong. Like, what are some of the maybe the less obvious things that go wrong? Like, a lot of our listeners are using jobs to be done, have been using it, or are now excited to read your book and start applying it to their business. But how should they avoid some of the things that can go wrong?
Yeah. A couple of things. Well, one mistake that I see goes back to our initial conversation around levels of abstraction and hierarchy. That's something that people struggle with, and then I've seen people land on things that are just too high. Like I said, you're a drill bit manufacturer and you start with improving people's home lives, and why not? So just getting that right, and it takes a little bit of practice. So that's something to keep in mind, right? You can read my book or any theory about jobs to be done and go, yeah, I get it. But to actually go out there with your business problem and your customers and actually make the framework work, it takes practice, like learning a language, right? So I've seen a lot of people kind of gung-ho go into it, but not actually have the skills, the language skills, so to speak, to actually drive the framework, and then they come out and they go, this didn't tell me anything. I'll look at it and I go, well, yeah, you scoped it wrong. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I want to say violating the rules, but that sounds a little too harsh. But there are some things in jobs to be done, particularly around how you formulate things, that are important not to compromise. Like, don't ever mention technology, solutions, or methods in your target job or your job statements, right? And then people show me and it's all over there. I'm like, you're not going to get the benefit of this. You're not going to get the longevity. You're not going to get the precision and the focus. You really can't cut corners sometimes. And that, for me, it's a skill, upskilling. And that's what I try to do is I try to help people get those skills that take practice. But trying to cut too many corners too quickly, right, is something where the framework, which doesn't necessarily mean it has to take a long time, because once you get familiar with the language, like I can do something pretty quickly. And by the way, you can use AI to give you a really nice head start with jobs to be done as well too. So I can do projects pretty quickly these days, to be honest with you. Which I would never say you don't have to talk to people. Because even if you use AI to help you come up with assumptions, like you still got to go out and talk to people. So I'm never saying that. But AI can actually accelerate your research greatly, so that it's not this big upfront thing, right? Again, that kind of takes practice, and you can't get to that degree of awareness and understanding of the framework if you're cutting corners too quickly in your framework. So scoping and cutting corners. The final thing is not bringing the jobs to be done modeling and results and insights to your team in a way that's collaborative. Thinking that you're going to get this answer and I'm going to walk into the team and they're going to lift me up on the shoulders and say, Jim, we've been waiting for you to tell us the answer. That never happens. People are skeptical. They're busy, right? Things like that. It has to be a collaborative decision with modern, empowered teams that we have.
How do you advise your teams to then deliver the message? So let's say they did some collaboration. So on the team level, we're good, because I'm seeing this a lot where someone got the bug and they're running with this process. They're loving it. They forget about everyone else. They got the insight and it's all in their mind, right? But then they're not a good presenter or they don't get it across, and it can lead to a lot of distrust and agony and pain and frustration. But how do you teach them to go up? Because ultimately you want to get it on a strategic table. There need to be some important decisions made to get things done. How do you advise your teams?
All right. Yeah. I've seen that as well too. I've done that as well too. Earlier in my career. Hey, I'm going to do this project. Hey guys, look, and who's this strange guy with this weird thing? Because I don't know what the heck you were doing in a black box, right? So definitely don't do that. There's a couple things that I'd answer this. One is, I have this simplified 5-stage process. It's not in my book. I've developed it since my book, but it's basically 5 steps: framing the target job, investigating the target job, creating a job map, prioritizing the other buckets of information, and then synthesizing it, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then from there, you can think about integrating it into other techniques or doing additional modeling. But that's my core process. What I want you to think about is at each one of those steps, what are you going to do to engage your team? So I'm trying to frame the target job, have a conversation around the hierarchy. I'm doing the investigation, bring them along to the interviews, right? I'm creating a job map. Have them help you create the job map. But then once you do, do this exercise where you're prioritizing things, right? And so forth and so on. So it's thinking about the touch points with your team throughout your process and keep those top of mind so you don't end up with the symptom that you just described, where I'm so excited I'm running ahead of everybody else. Okay, stop, keep the excitement, but you want to spread it to your team as well too and bring them along with you. I think the other thing that I would say as well too is get some facilitation skills, seriously, because I say this with journey mapping as well too, is that you're a map maker, but then you better be a facilitator too, right? It's part of map making, in my opinion. Same thing with jobs to be done. You might be a jobs to be done expert or researcher, but then you're a conversation facilitator, because none of the answers are going to magically just pop out of this information, right? It's about the sense making that the team has to go through that, and you need to lead that sense making. So you're a facilitator, whether you want to or not. How good you are, depends, and how much you do also depends. But I think it's to our benefit to be a facilitator, and there are ways to get skills, right? There are training courses on facilitation, there are books, and to just think and be intentional about some of those things. And I know some people are introverts and they're shy and I can't get up in front. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that, but still thinking about how are you going to facilitate your team along that journey is something that we all need to be doing.
I love these practical examples, and when we talk about Gen AI, the other part of the work is often like we can speed up the analysis work. We get a lot of qualitative research done. We get a lot of data that we have to sift through. So that is usually beneficial. The other part is that it's also very beneficial of doing the work yourself, because then you really dig in and understand it. But there's a balance, and especially in the scaling, and this applies to journey management as well. That you can't do this you can do this for one job, you can do this for 10 jobs, but if you do this for all jobs or all journeys, how would you balance this between using Gen AI to sift through your data automatically and helping you understand, helping you analyze all this like unstructured data versus like doing the work yourself, having humans in the loop? Like, what is the latest on this in your thinking?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I think jobs to be done, it's not, as we say in the US, it's not peanut butter. And by that we mean you don't just spread it on everything. It's not, you don't just take out a piece of bread. I think it's even more strategic. I'll go out on a limb and say it's slightly more strategic than something like journey mapping, and certainly more strategic than other design and innovation motions as well too. So yeah, you don't want to go out and throw jobs to be done at everything you have around you. Keep it for the strategic stuff, right? The stuff that are the big gaps in knowledge that your organization or your team has, and you want to be able to fill that in. So that's kind of the first thing. But I think also it's really, I think it's really about I just used the word intentional. It's about being intentional about when you're going to use jobs to be done and when you're not as well too. And same with journey mapping, because then you end up with journey map proliferation. And I know you have a great tool that's fighting that. But I think you would probably still agree. You don't want just a journey map for everything, right? There should be a reason to have journey maps. And personas is another thing, right? I worked in a company where we did a persona inventory, and we went around to all the different design teams and marketing. We found 200 different personas in the organization, because everybody was just doing personas, right? So you want to be a little more intentional and centered on when you're doing jobs to be done, just like you would with personas and journey maps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like if you have 200 personas, you have a very big problem, because then
Yes.
you don't have really like need-based profiles. You just have mayhem. What I've found on journeys is the same as what you explained with jobs, is that you have the hierarchy, but in like the third or fourth or fifth, some people have like really complicated frameworks. That's where the complexity can kick in, and that's where there's like sometimes a million records, snippets, data points, quotes, feedback points from different surveys, from different feedback interactions with customer service, from maybe even like reviews coming from different places where you capture them. Like there's a ton of data, and that's fine. That's where I use Gen AI. But then when you go higher in the hierarchy, That's when you have like a human in the loop where we really start to think about what is the impact on the business if we're going to change something here. What is actually the data we need, the metrics we need, but also like what is the emotion that we're tackling. So up to that level is fantastic, but you want to start summarizing, right? And that's when you need people to assess, to prioritize, and bring that to the table. But like the hardest grunt work on the lower levels, there's a lot of loss of resources, time, people.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
Research, whatever we do today, that can be solved with this. So I think it's a fantastic tool, but the synthesis on the human level, like that's where it's still interesting today. I mean, we're recording this in 2024, so if you're listening to this in 2030, you're like, oh, these guys are like, they don't know. But like for now, let's say AGI is not here, so we still need humans in the loop, and I think that's a phenomenal way to think about it.
The other two things with Gen AI and jobs to be done is one, as much as I try to instruct, something like ChatGPT or one of these common tools to give me information back in the format that I need, there's always something that's off, right? And the only reason I know it's off is because I understand the framework, right? So don't go into using AI if you don't really understand the jobs to be done framework or the journey mapping framework or the persona framework as well too, because you have to discern whether that's a good output or not, right? And then the other thing is validating what comes out of AI, because I've done some jobs to be done analysis starting with AI. And by the way, in jobs to be done, we don't have to feed it interview data. I can just ask it. I can say, what are the job steps of this job? And it'll take a whack at it and give me some hypotheses. And it's usually like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. But then you're like, oh, I just went out and talked to somebody, and within 15 minutes, they mentioned 5 things that AI missed. You know what I mean? So for me, it's a complementary tool. The way that I like to think about jobs to be done in AI, because you can just query AI and have it try to guess what a model would be, is it makes you a smarter researcher, a more informed researcher, particularly if you're working in fields that you're unfamiliar with. Right? I was working in network security recently, and they're like, yeah, we want to, Jim, help us with the job. I was like, I don't know anything about that, right? But then I said, okay, what's the target job? And, and I queried AI, and it was, oh, okay, now I have a sense of what the steps are. They're just assumptions and things like that. But it made me, I was able to talk to my stakeholder at a much more intelligent level. And if I had actually done interviews, I probably would have gone out into the field and had a better peripheral sense of what's going on in the job as well too. So for me, AI and doing real interviews is very much complementary and beneficial.
Where can people find you other than the JTBD toolkit.com? Where can people find you nowadays if they want to interact with you, learn more, read your books? Like what should we put in the show notes?
I hang out a lot on LinkedIn. Actually, that's the best place. I kind of got off Twitter, whatever they call it these days. But I'm out on LinkedIn. I love to connect with people too, so if you want to connect with me. But I do post about my webinars and upcoming things and things like that out on LinkedIn. So the best thing to do would be go out on LinkedIn other than the Toolkit website.
That's awesome. Jim, it was fantastic speaking with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great conversation. Absolutely loved it. And I hope folks find it valuable.
All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to The Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by Daydo, the AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit daydo.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends, and here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, keep pushing the edge and stay inspired. See you in the next episode.